You're not waiting, you're wasting. There's a particular kind of death that happens slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing, not even you. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or symptoms. It just shows up in the small, forgettable moments. The vacation you postpone because work is crazy right now. The hobby you'll start when you have more time. The conversation with your kid you delay because there will be other nights. Years pass, decades even. And then one day, you realize something terrifying. You've been in the audience of your own life, watching it happen to someone else. This isn't a book about time management or productivity hacks. This is about something far more dangerous and far more common. The belief that your real life is waiting for you somewhere in the future. Just beyond the next goal, the next milestone, the next when. When you get the promotion, when you pay off the mortgage, when the kids are older, when you retire, when conditions are perfect. That future never comes. What you're experiencing has a name. Psychologists call it Deferred Life Syndrome, a pattern of thinking where the present becomes nothing more than preparation for a future that perpetually stays out of reach. Your today is devalued. Your now is dismissed. Everything meaningful gets shoved into an imaginary tomorrow that you're convinced will finally be the right time to start living. Here's what the research shows. People living with deferred life syndrome report anxiety levels 45% higher than those living in the present. That's not just stress. That's your nervous system screaming at you that something is deeply wrong, that you're trading your life for a mirage. I know what you're thinking. Everyone has responsibilities, obligations, things they need to get through before they can relax and enjoy life. You're being practical. You're being mature. You're doing what you're supposed to do. That's the trap talking. The actor Jim Carrey once said something that stopped people cold. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. He wasn't being cynical. He was telling the truth about the biggest lie we've been sold. That happiness lives on the other side of achievement. That life begins when conditions align perfectly. Carrey reached the top of the mountain. He got everything millions of people dream about. And he discovered what people with deferred life syndrome discover too late. The mountaintop is just another waiting room. Because if you haven't learned how to be present in your life, no amount of success, money, or perfect circumstances will save you. You'll just find new reasons to postpone joy. New conditions that need to be met before you give yourself permission to live. This syndrome isn't weakness. It's not laziness or lack of ambition. It's a deeply ingrained pattern formed by years of being told to delay gratification, sacrifice the present for the future, and earn your happiness through suffering. It's cultural conditioning dressed up as wisdom. It's fear masquerading as responsibility. You might be reading this and recognizing yourself in every sentence. You might feel the weight of years spent waiting, years spent believing that your real life would start once you cleared all the hurdles. Maybe you're 43 and suddenly realizing you've been preparing for life since you were 23. Maybe you're 57 and wondering where the last 3 decades disappeared to. Maybe you're younger, but already feeling the creeping dread that you're living on autopilot, checking boxes that lead nowhere. This book will not give you empty motivation. It will not tell you to follow your passion or live like there's no tomorrow, without showing you exactly how. What I'm going to give you is the neuroscience behind why you're stuck, the psychology of how you got here, and the concrete, actionable steps to break free. Not someday, but starting today. You'll learn the 3 core fears that keep you locked in waiting mode. You'll discover why achieving your goals often leaves you feeling emptier than before. You'll understand the neurological patterns that make deferring happiness feel safer than embracing it. And most importantly, you'll get practical tools, techniques backed by research, tested in real lives, to rewire your relationship with time, with your goals, and with your own worthiness to experience joy right now. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Changing these patterns is uncomfortable. It requires you to confront the beliefs you've been living by, the narratives you've told yourself about why you can't start living fully until X, Y, or Z happens. It means accepting that some of the sacrifices you made, thinking they'd pay off eventually, might have been unnecessary. That's a bitter pill. But here's the alternative. Waiting becomes a lifestyle. Deferring becomes your default. The excuses pile up. Once this quarter is over, once the project is done, once things settle down, and before you know it, you're 70 years old, sitting in a doctor's office being told you have limited time. That's when it hits you. You always had limited time. You just spent it in the waiting room, convinced the real show was about to start. Every day you spend in when-then thinking is a day you will never get back. Not dramatic, not metaphorical. Literally true. You are dying right now. We all are. The only question is whether you're going to actually live during the time you have, or whether you're going to postpone life until there's none left to postpone. This book is your permission slip to stop waiting. It's your roadmap out of the terminal and onto the plane. It's your wake-up call that the life you're preparing for is already happening, and you're missing it. The chapters ahead will walk you through everything: diagnosis, root causes, the real cost of deferring, the mindset shifts required, and the practical systems that work. You'll meet people like you who broke free. You'll see the science that explains why this happens. You'll get tools you can implement immediately. But none of it matters if you're still waiting for the perfect moment to start. There is no perfect moment. There's only this one, and this one, and this one. Strung together, those moments are your life. Not the highlight reel you're saving up for. Not the fantasy version that starts when. The life you're living right now, in this exact form, messy and imperfect and finite. So here's the real question. Are you ready to stop living for tomorrow? Are you ready to step out of the waiting room and into your actual life? Because the plane is boarding. The doors are closing soon. And if you don't move now, you'll spend the rest of your years watching others fly while you sit in the terminal, convincing yourself you'll catch the next one. There is no next one. Chapter 1. Your life is on pause, and you did this to yourself. Michael sits in his corner office on the 42nd floor in downtown Chicago, staring at a spreadsheet that stopped making sense an hour ago. He's 43 years old, partner at a corporate law firm, 6-figure salary, respected by colleagues, feared by junior associates. On paper, he's winning. On paper. The truth is something else entirely. 20 years ago, fresh out of law school, Michael made himself a promise. Grind hard for a decade, make partner, then start living. Travel to Italy, learn to play jazz piano, spend real time with whoever he'd end up marrying. The plan was simple. Sacrifice now, live later. Except later kept moving. He made partner at 35, earlier than most, and immediately the goalpost shifted. Now he needed to secure his position, build his book of clients, prove he deserved to be there. Once I'm established, he told himself, then I'll ease up. That was 8 years ago. He still works 70-hour weeks. He still skips vacations. The piano he bought 5 years ago sits in his apartment, untouched, gathering dust under a sheet. Michael doesn't realize it, but he's living with something psychologists have a name for: Deferred Life Syndrome. It's the pattern of thinking where today is just preparation for a tomorrow that never quite arrives. The present becomes devalued, stripped of meaning, reduced to a stepping stone toward some imaginary future where life finally begins. And Michael is far from alone. Research conducted by psychologists at Prague Integration Center found that deferred life syndrome is rooted in two core dysfunctions: chronically low self-esteem and tunnel vision thinking. The person believes, often unconsciously, that they aren't yet worthy of happiness or fulfillment. They need to achieve more, become more, earn more before they deserve to actually enjoy their life. And they fixate so intensely on a single distant goal that everything else, relationships, health, joy, becomes expendable. This isn't ambition. This isn't discipline. This is a mental prison you built for yourself, one when-then statement at a time. When I get promoted, then I'll take that trip. When I pay off the house, then I'll relax. When the kids are in college, then I'll focus on myself. When I retire, then my real life starts. Each of these statements sounds reasonable in isolation, but strung together over years and decades, they become a life sentence. Because here's the trap. Even when you reach the goal, the relief lasts about 5 minutes before your brain generates a new condition. You got the promotion? Great. Now you need the next one. Paid off the house? Time to upgrade. Kids graduated? Now you worry about grandkids or aging parents or something else that justifies postponing joy a little longer. The goalposts don't stay still because the problem was never the goal. The problem is the belief that you need permission from external circumstances to start living. Think about Walter Mitty in the 2013 film. A man who spends his entire existence daydreaming about adventure, while his actual life consists of nothing but routine and hesitation. He imagines himself as a hero in 1,000 scenarios while standing still in reality. That's not entertainment. That's a documentary about how most people live. You fantasize about the life you'll have someday, while the life you're in evaporates, one deferred moment at a time. So how do you know if you're stuck in this pattern? How do you know if you've been living on pause while convincing yourself you're being strategic? Here are 10 questions. Answer them honestly. Do you frequently think, "I'll be happy when," or "life will be better once"? Do you postpone activities you enjoy because you feel you haven't earned them yet? Do you struggle to remember the last time you did something purely for pleasure, with no future benefit in mind? Do you feel guilty taking time off or doing things that aren't productive? Do you have hobbies or interests you keep saying you'll pursue someday but never start? Do you rationalize sacrificing today because the payoff will come tomorrow? Do you feel uncomfortable or anxious when you're not working towards something? Do you look back at the past year and realize you can't remember any moments that felt truly alive or present? Do people in your life complain that you're always distracted, always thinking about what's next instead of what's now? Do you wake up with a vague sense that your life is happening somewhere else, to someone else, and you're just watching it pass by? If you answered yes to 5 or more of these questions, you're not planning for the future. You're hiding from the present. Michael would have answered yes to all 10. But he doesn't take quizzes like this. He doesn't read books about deferred life or mindfulness or presence. He's too busy preparing for a life he'll never actually live because he'll always be preparing. Every Monday, he tells himself this will be the week he leaves the office by 7. Every Sunday night, he tells himself he'll finally call his brother back, the one he hasn't spoken to in 3 months despite living 20 minutes away. Every time he sees the piano, he tells himself he'll start lessons next month once this big case wraps up. But there's always another case. there's always another reason to defer. The present moment is never quite good enough. It's never the right time. Conditions are never perfect. There's always one more thing to handle, one more goal to hit, one more milestone to pass before he gives himself permission to exhale. This is how decades disappear. Research shows that people with deferred life syndrome don't just postpone happiness. They actively devalue it. The brain develops a habit of dismissing anything that doesn't contribute to the distant goal as frivolous or unimportant. Lunch with a friend. That's time you could spend networking. A weekend hiking trip? That's time away from building your business. Playing with your kids without checking your phone. That's time wasted when you could be multitasking. The tragedy isn't that you're working hard. The tragedy is that you're working hard for a fantasy. You're pouring your life into a future version of yourself who will finally be satisfied, finally be happy, finally be enough. But that version doesn't exist. Because no matter what you achieve, if you haven't learned how to be present in your life, you'll just find new reasons to keep waiting. Michael doesn't know this yet. He's still convinced that in another 5 years, maybe 10, things will settle down and he'll finally start living. He has no idea that he's been saying a version of that sentence for the last 20 years. He has no idea that his entire adult life has been spent in the waiting room, watching the clock, convinced his boarding call is coming any minute. It's not coming. Because there is no boarding call. There's no announcement that says, "Okay, you've earned it. Go live now." The only person who can give you that permission is you. And if you're waiting for circumstances to align perfectly before you start, you'll wait forever. Perfect never comes. The conditions will never be ideal. There will always be something left to do, something left to achieve, something left to fix before you allow yourself to step into your own life. So here's the assignment. If you're brave enough to do it, write down 3 when-then statements you tell yourself. 3 ways you've been postponing life. Get specific. Don't sugarcoat it. Look at the sentences you wrote and ask yourself, how long have you been saying these things? How many years have you been waiting for these conditions to be met? And what will you do if they never are? Because the hard truth is this. You might reach those goals and still feel empty. You might achieve everything you thought you needed and realize the problem was never the circumstances. The problem was the belief that your life is something that happens later, instead of something that's happening right now, whether you're paying attention or not. Chapter 2. The 3 lies that keep you stuck. Michael's father was a factory worker in Gary, Indiana. 38 years on the same assembly line, clocking in at 6 in the morning, clocking out at 4 in the afternoon, every single day. Weekends, he'd sit in his recliner, beer in hand, watching whatever game was on, saying the same thing he'd been saying since Michael was a kid. One day you'll understand. You work hard now so you can rest later. Michael understood. He understood so well that he built his entire life around that principle. Sacrifice today, earn tomorrow, delay everything good until you've proven you deserve it. What Michael didn't understand was that his father never got to later. He retired at 63, had a heart attack at 65, and spent his final years too sick to do any of the things he'd postponed. The trips he'd planned, the hobbies he'd meant to pick up, the time he'd promised to spend with grandkids, all of it evaporated. Michael stood at his father's funeral thinking, this won't be me. I'm smarter, I'm planning better. But Michael is doing exactly what his father did. He's just doing it in a corner office instead of on a factory floor. The lies we tell ourselves about deferred living don't come out of nowhere. They're inherited, absorbed, conditioned into us by families, cultures, and systems that equate suffering with virtue and rest with laziness. And there are 3 lies in particular that keep people like Michael trapped in the waiting room of their own lives. Lie number 1. I'm not ready yet. This is the most insidious one because it sounds so reasonable. Of course you want to be prepared. Of course you want to have your ducks in a row before you start living the life you actually want. The problem is that ready is a moving target. There's always one more certification to get, one more skill to master, one more dollar to save, one more year of experience to log before you feel qualified. Michael tells himself he's not ready to take a real vacation because he needs to solidify his client relationships first. He's not ready to date seriously because his schedule is too unpredictable. He's not ready to pursue his interest in music because he'd be starting from scratch and wouldn't be good at it immediately. What he's really saying is, I'm not good enough yet to deserve the things I want. Research on maladaptive schemas, core dysfunctional beliefs that shape behavior, shows that people with deferred life syndrome often operate from a deep-seated belief in their own inadequacy. They don't feel worthy of joy, connection, or fulfillment until they've achieved enough to prove their value. This is textbook low self-esteem dressed up as ambition. The schema goes something like this. If I'm not exceptional, I'm worthless. If I'm not producing, I have no value. If I haven't earned it through suffering, I don't deserve it. And so they defer everything meaningful, waiting for the day they finally feel like they've done enough. That day never comes, because the bar keeps rising. The more they achieve, the more inadequate they feel, because the achievements never fill the hole they're trying to fill. Lie number 2. The conditions aren't right yet. Michael has a long list of reasons why now isn't the time to make any changes. Work is too demanding. The economy is uncertain. He just took on a new client. His lease isn't up for another 6 months. He's waiting for the market to stabilize, for the project to wrap up, for things to calm down. This is perfectionism disguised as practicality. It's the belief that there's a perfect moment coming, a moment when everything aligns, when all obstacles disappear, when the path forward is clear and risk-free. That moment doesn't exist. Conditions are never perfect. There will always be something happening, something demanding your attention, something that makes it inconvenient to start living differently. But here's the trap. Perfectionism isn't really about wanting things to be perfect. It's about fear. Fear of starting something and failing. Fear of trying and discovering you're not as good as you hoped. Fear of taking a risk and losing what little security you've built. So you wait for perfect conditions as a way to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of actually trying. The famous Stanford marshmallow experiment, conducted by psychologist Walter Mischel in the 1960s, is often cited as proof that delayed gratification leads to success. Kids who could wait for a bigger reward later performed better in life. But the lesson people took from that study has been catastrophically misapplied. Delaying gratification when it serves a meaningful goal is one thing. Delaying your entire life indefinitely, convinced that happiness is something you earn through decades of deprivation, is something else entirely. Michael isn't delaying gratification. He's denying existence. He's living in a perpetual state of not yet, where the present is just a placeholder for a future that keeps receding. He's been conditioned to believe that wanting things now is weak, that prioritizing enjoyment over productivity is selfish, that rest is something you earn only after you've nearly killed yourself working. This is American culture distilled into personal psychology, the Protestant work ethic on steroids, the myth that suffering now guarantees reward later, the toxic belief that your value as a human being is measured by how much you produce and how little you need. Lie number 3. I don't have a choice. This is the lie of powerlessness. Michael would tell you he can't just walk away from his job, can't just stop working 70-hour weeks, can't just prioritize his own life over his responsibilities. He has obligations, bills, a reputation to maintain, people depending on him. His hands are tied, except they're not. What Michael has is a set of choices he's made, often unconsciously, about what matters more. He's chosen status over presence. He's chosen security over spontaneity. He's chosen the approval of colleagues he doesn't even like over his own sense of aliveness. These are choices, uncomfortable ones, choices with trade-offs, but they're still choices. The psychological concept of locus of control explains this perfectly. People with an external locus of control believe their lives are shaped primarily by outside forces, circumstances, other people, luck, fate. People with an internal locus of control believe they have agency, that their choices and actions significantly influence their outcomes. Michael has handed his locus of control over to his job, his clients, his father's ghost whispering in his ear about hard work and delayed rewards. He's given away his power and then convinced himself he never had any to begin with. And this is where the lies intersect and reinforce each other. He's not ready yet, so he needs to work harder. The conditions aren't right, so he needs to wait longer. He doesn't have a choice, so he's stuck. Round and round it goes, a self-sustaining system of deferral that feels logical from the inside, even as it devours his life from the outside. Michael's patterns didn't start with him. His father worked himself to death waiting for later. His grandfather probably did the same. This is generational, cultural, passed down like a family heirloom nobody wanted but everyone keeps. The belief that life is something you earn through suffering, that joy is a luxury reserved for people who've paid their dues, that the present moment is never quite enough. But here's what the research on cognitive behavioral therapy tells us. These schemas, these core beliefs, can be challenged. They're not facts. They're interpretations, narratives, stories you've been telling yourself for so long that they feel like truth. And if they can be learned, they can be unlearned. Michael sits in his office late on a Thursday night, the city lights glowing 42 floors below, and thinks about his father's funeral. He thinks about the eulogy he gave, talking about all the things his father was going to do after retirement. He thinks about the promises he made to himself at the cemetery. I won't make the same mistakes. I won't wait until it's too late. And then he opens his laptop and gets back to work. Because there's a brief due tomorrow. Because he's not ready to change yet. Because the conditions aren't right. Because he doesn't have a choice. The lies are winning. And they'll keep winning until he decides to confront them. Chapter 3. What fear really costs you. 3 fears drive deferred life syndrome. They operate quietly, beneath conscious awareness, shaping every decision about when to start living and why now is never the right time. Michael knows these fears intimately, though he'd never call them that. He calls them being realistic, being responsible, being smart. Fear of unworthiness. I haven't earned it yet. On Michael's 43rd birthday, his younger brother sent him a gift card to a high-end jazz club in Chicago, the kind of place Michael has walked past 100 times, always meaning to go, but never actually going. The card sat on his desk for 2 months before he finally threw it away, expired and unused. When his brother asked about it, Michael said he'd been too busy. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Michael didn't feel like he deserved to spend an evening at a jazz club when he hadn't closed the Morrison deal yet. He hadn't earned leisure. He hadn't done enough to justify taking 3 hours on a Tuesday night to sit in a dark room and listen to music. This is the first fear. The belief that joy, pleasure, and fulfillment are rewards you must earn through suffering and achievement. That you're not inherently worthy of a good life. You have to prove yourself first. And the bar for proof is always just out of reach. Constantly rising, never satisfied. Research published by the National Center for Biotechnology Information on delay discounting, the tendency to prioritize future rewards over immediate ones, shows a troubling pattern. People who chronically defer gratification don't just delay pleasure. They generate significantly higher levels of stress hormones, experience more frequent anxiety episodes, and report lower overall life satisfaction. The act of constantly postponing creates a biochemical punishment loop. Your body knows something is wrong, even when your mind rationalizes the behavior. Michael's body knows. He's had 3 stress-related health scares in the past 5 years, chest pains that turned out to be anxiety, chronic insomnia, a bout of shingles at 41. His doctor keeps telling him to slow down. Michael keeps promising he will, right after the next big case. Fear of failure. What if I try and it's not good enough? The piano in Michael's apartment isn't just gathering dust. It's a monument to this second fear. He bought it 5 years ago with every intention of learning to play. He even hired a teacher, a patient woman in her 60s who came to his apartment every Thursday evening for exactly 3 lessons before Michael canceled indefinitely, citing work commitments. The truth? He was terrible. Clumsy, frustrated. His hands didn't know where to go. The teacher said it was normal, that everyone struggles at first, that learning an instrument takes time and patience. But Michael couldn't stand being bad at something. He spent his entire adult life being competent, respected, the person others turned to for answers. Sitting at that piano, fumbling through basic scales, he felt like an imposter, a failure. So he stopped. It was easier to postpone learning piano indefinitely than to endure the humiliation of being a beginner. Easier to tell himself he'd start again when he had more time, when he could dedicate himself properly, when he could do it right. Perfectionism as a shield against vulnerability. But perfectionism isn't about excellence. It's about fear. The fear that if you try and fail, you'll confirm what you've always suspected about yourself. That you're not good enough. That you'll never be good enough. That all your achievements are just elaborate distractions from your fundamental inadequacy. This fear doesn't just prevent you from learning piano. It prevents you from doing anything that might expose your limitations. You don't take risks. You don't try new things. You don't allow yourself to be seen struggling because struggle means weakness, and weakness is unacceptable. Fear of disappointment. What if I get what I want and I'm still unhappy? This is the fear Michael doesn't talk about, not even to himself. But it's there, lurking beneath every rationalization for why now isn't the time. It's the terrifying possibility that even if he achieves everything he's been working toward, even if he finally gives himself permission to live, he'll discover that it doesn't fix what's broken inside him. Because deep down, Michael suspects that the problem isn't his circumstances. The problem is him. And if that's true, then no amount of achievement or delayed gratification will ever be enough. He'll still wake up feeling empty. He'll still feel like he's waiting for something he can't name. He'll still be standing at a distance from his own life, watching it happen to someone else. So he doesn't test it. He keeps the dream intact by never pursuing it. He preserves the fantasy of future happiness by never demanding that it deliver on its promises. As long as he's still preparing, still working toward it, still sacrificing in the name of someday, He can maintain the belief that everything will be different once he arrives. This is what psychologists call existential avoidance, the refusal to confront the reality of your finite existence and the choices you're making with it. It's easier to live in perpetual deferral than to face the possibility that you've been working toward the wrong things for the wrong reasons. Celebrity culture gives us plenty of examples of people who achieved everything and found it hollow. Actress Lindsay Lohan, after years of fame and chaos, finally said in an interview, "I live from today. My life every day is a new day. I live without regrets." She had to lose everything, career, reputation, years of her life, before she learned that happiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you choose, moment by moment, regardless of circumstances. But Michael doesn't want to learn that lesson. He wants to believe that his suffering is an investment that will pay off, that all these sacrifices will be worth it, that the life he's imagining will finally satisfy the hunger he's been feeling since he was 23 years old, and promised himself he'd start living in 10 years. 20 years have passed. Michael is the same age his father was when Michael graduated law school. Back then, he thought his father was old, worn down, defeated by a life of hard work and deferred dreams. Now Michael looks in the mirror and sees the same exhaustion in his own eyes, the same tension in his jaw, the same vague disappointment that settles in his chest every Sunday night when he realizes another weekend disappeared into email and case prep. He thinks about calling his brother. They used to be close, back before law school consumed Michael's life. Now they see each other maybe twice a year, exchange texts on birthdays, make vague promises to get together for a game or a beer that never actually happens. Michael's brother is younger by 3 years, works as a middle school teacher, makes a fraction of Michael's salary. He lives in a small house with his wife and 2 kids. He coaches Little League on weekends. He takes his summers off. He seems content, not ambitious, not driven, not particularly successful by any conventional measure. And Michael, in his rare moments of honesty, envies him, because his brother seems to actually inhabit his life instead of constantly preparing for it. His brother doesn't talk about what he'll do when he has more time. He has time now, and he uses it. He doesn't justify taking a Saturday off, he just takes it. He doesn't seem burdened by the need to prove his worth through achievement. He just exists. Present. Alive. Michael tried to explain this once to a colleague who asked why he never seemed happy despite his success. "You know that feeling when you're at the airport?" Michael said, "and you're just waiting for your flight to board. You're not really present. You're in transit, you're between places. That's how my whole life feels. Like I'm always waiting for boarding to start so the actual trip can begin." His colleague laughed and said, "Man, you need a vacation." Michael said, "Yeah, maybe next year." The cost of these 3 fears, unworthiness, failure, disappointment, isn't measured in missed vacations or unused jazz club gift cards. The cost is your life itself. Every day spent deferring is a day you won't get back. Every moment sacrificed to the altar of someday is a moment that ceases to exist. You're not saving your life for later. You're spending it on nothing, on waiting, on the fantasy that future you will somehow have more permission to be happy than present you. Michael sits in his office on a Friday evening, alone on the 42nd floor, and asks himself a question he's been avoiding for 20 years. Which of these fears is running my life right now? He doesn't answer. Not yet. Because answering means acknowledging. And acknowledging means choosing. And choosing means risk. So he opens his laptop and gets back to work. The fears win another round. Chapter 4. The regrets you're building right now. Jennifer Torres is 47 years old, and she just realized she can't remember the last time someone hugged her. Not a professional shoulder pat or polite side hug at a networking event. A real hug. The kind that lasts more than 2 seconds. The kind where someone holds on because they actually care. Where you feel seen instead of assessed. She's standing in the produce section of Whole Foods on a Thursday evening, holding an overpriced organic avocado, when this thought hits her with enough force that she has to steady herself against the cart. 22 years in Silicon Valley? Senior Vice President of Product at a company with a valuation that made headlines. She owns a condo in Palo Alto that's worth more than most people will earn in a lifetime. She has stock options that vest next year, a Tesla in the garage, invitations to conferences around the world. And she cannot remember the last time someone held her like she mattered more than what she could produce. In 2004, palliative care nurse Bronnie Ware began documenting the dying regrets of her patients in Australia. These weren't abstract philosophical musings. They were the raw, unfiltered truths of people who'd run out of tomorrows and were forced to confront what they'd done with their yesterdays. The number one regret, nearly universal across her patients. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. The number two regret, expressed by every male patient. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. But there was a third regret, one that Ware noted appeared most frequently among her female patients, particularly those who'd prioritized career over relationships. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. Jennifer is building all three of these regrets simultaneously, one deleted calendar invite at a time. Unlike Michael, who inherited his deferral patterns from a father who worked himself to death, Jennifer's story is different. Her parents were immigrants from Mexico who ran a small grocery store in San Jose. They worked brutal hours to give her opportunities they never had. Her mother used to say, "Mija, you have to be twice as good to get half as far. Never forget that." Jennifer didn't forget. She internalized it so deeply that twice as good became her minimum standard for everything. She graduated top of her class at Stanford. She was the only woman in most of her early engineering roles. She learned quickly that taking time off was perceived as lack of commitment, that having personal needs was seen as weakness, that any deviation from absolute dedication would be used as evidence that women couldn't compete at the highest levels. So she didn't deviate. She outworked everyone. She said yes to every project, every deadline, every opportunity to prove she belonged. And it worked. She climbed faster than most of her male peers. She made more money than she'd ever imagined. She became the woman others pointed to as proof that the playing field was level. The cost? She stopped being a person and became a performance. Jennifer hasn't spoken to her best friend from college in 3 years. Not because of a fight. Because Jennifer kept canceling plans. Kept saying soon, I promise. And then getting pulled into another product launch, another crisis, another reason why this week wasn't good. Eventually, her friend stopped reaching out. Jennifer tells herself she'll reconnect once things slow down. Things never slow down. Her younger sister got married last year. Jennifer flew in for the wedding, answered emails through most of the reception, and flew out the next morning for a Monday meeting. Her sister hasn't called since. When Jennifer finally texted to ask if everything was okay, her sister replied, "You showed up to my wedding, but you weren't there. I don't know how else to explain it." Jennifer told herself her sister was being dramatic. Told herself that being there physically should count. Told herself that her career demanded sacrifices and people who loved her should understand. She didn't tell herself the truth, that she'd become so skilled at being absent while physically present that she no longer knew how to do the opposite. The hedonic treadmill. a phenomenon documented by psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell in 1971, explains why Jennifer's achievements never satisfy her. Every promotion produces a brief rush of validation followed by a rapid return to baseline dissatisfaction. The pay raise feels significant for a week. The new title impresses people at dinner parties for a month. And then it all normalizes. And she's looking at the next goal, convinced that one will finally be enough. But the treadmill isn't just about achievements. For Jennifer, it's about worth. She equates her value as a human being with her professional output. If she stops producing, stops achieving, stops climbing, who is she? What is she worth? The terror of answering those questions keeps her running. 3 months ago, Jennifer's mother was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. The doctors said they caught it early, that there are years left, that Jennifer should spend time with her while she still recognizes everyone. Jennifer flew home for the diagnosis appointment, stayed for 3 days, and then flew back to prepare for a product launch. She calls every Sunday. 10 minutes, sometimes 15. Her mother asks the same questions she asked last week. Jennifer answers patiently, says she'll visit soon, says she loves her, and then hangs up and goes back to work. She'll visit more once the launch is done, once the next quarter starts, once she has more time. Except her mother's memory is eroding faster than projected. Last Sunday there was a moment, just a flicker, where her mother paused mid-sentence and looked at Jennifer through the phone screen with confusion. "I'm sorry, who is this again?" Jennifer laughed it off. "It's me, Mom. Jennifer, your daughter." "Oh yes, of course. The busy one." The busy one. As if that's her defining characteristic. As if 22 years of sacrifice and achievement have distilled down to the daughter who's too busy. The 2006 film Click tells the story of a man who fast-forwards through life's inconvenient moments, only to discover he skipped everything that mattered. It's supposed to be a comedy, then a cautionary tale. Jennifer watched it on a plane once and cried, which she never does. She told herself it was because she was tired. She didn't admit it was recognition. Jennifer is fast-forwarding through her life. Not with a magic remote, but with the belief that relationships, presence, and connection are things she can defer until she's achieved enough to deserve them. She's been postponing emotional availability for 2 decades, convinced that once she reaches some mythical level of professional security, she'll finally have permission to be human. But here's what Bronnie Ware's research revealed that most people don't talk about. The dying patients didn't just regret what they did. They regretted who they became. They regretted the hardening, the emotional calcification, the slow transformation from feeling human beings into efficient machines. They regretted learning to suppress their needs so effectively that they eventually forgot they had any. Jennifer can't remember the last time she cried in front of another person. Can't remember the last time she asked for help. Can't remember the last time she admitted she was scared or lonely or didn't have everything figured out. She's spent so long performing strength that she's forgotten how to be vulnerable. And vulnerability, it turns out, is the price of admission for actual connection. Standing in Whole Foods with her expensive avocado, Jennifer does something she hasn't done in months. She abandons her cart mid-shopping and walks out. She sits in her Tesla in the parking lot and pulls up her sister's contact. Her thumb hovers over the call button. She rehearses what she'll say. "I'm sorry. You were right. I wasn't there. I haven't been there for a long time. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try." She sits there for 7 minutes. Then she puts the phone down, starts the car, and drives home. She'll call tomorrow. She'll definitely call this weekend. She'll visit next month before things get busier. She promises herself. The regrets pile higher. Her mother forgets a little more. Her sister's phone stops ringing. And Jennifer keeps running on the treadmill, telling herself that someday soon, maybe after the next product launch, maybe after the next promotion, she'll finally slow down and become the person she used to be before she decided that person wasn't valuable enough. Someday. Always someday. Never today. Chapter 5. There is no perfect time, only now. You know the lie you've been telling yourself. It's the one that sounds so reasonable you don't even recognize it as fiction. It goes like this. Once you achieve X, once you reach milestone Y, once conditions align perfectly, then, and only then, will you finally be happy. Then your real life begins. The lie is so pervasive, so culturally reinforced, that you probably believe it's just how life works. You sacrifice now to earn happiness later. You delay gratification because that's what responsible, mature adults do. You wait for the right time because starting before you're ready would be foolish. Except there's a problem with this logic, and it's one that took psychologists decades to properly document. Reaching your goals doesn't make you happy. At least, not in the way you think it will. In 1971, psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell published research on what they called hedonic adaptation, the phenomenon where humans rapidly adjust to new circumstances and return to a baseline level of happiness regardless of what happens to them. This concept later became known as the hedonic treadmill. And it explains why lottery winners return to their pre-win happiness levels within months, why people who become paralyzed often return to near baseline contentment within a year, and why your last promotion felt amazing for about 3 days before becoming your new normal. The treadmill works like this. You achieve something you've been working toward, something you convinced yourself would change everything. And it does feel significant. For a moment, maybe a day, maybe a week if you're lucky. And then your brain recalibrates. The achievement becomes the new baseline. The promotion is just your job now. The house you saved for is just where you live. The relationship you worked so hard to build is just your daily reality. And you find yourself looking at the next goal, convinced that one will finally deliver the lasting satisfaction this one didn't. You're not broken. This is how human brains work. We're adaptation machines. We adjust. We normalize. We keep moving the goalpost because we're wired to seek and strive, to never fully settle. And that's useful for survival. It's terrible for happiness. Here's what this means for your deferred life. No future achievement will ever feel like permission to stop and enjoy your life, because every achievement will eventually feel ordinary, and you'll generate a new condition for happiness. You'll always be one milestone away from allowing yourself to be present, one goal away from giving yourself permission to live. You'll spend your entire life on the treadmill, running toward a satisfaction that keeps receding at exactly the pace you approach it. This isn't speculation. This is measurable, documented, replicated across decades of psychological research. And it means that the strategy you've been using, sacrifice now, live later, is fundamentally flawed. You're working toward a payoff that doesn't exist in the form you imagine. So what's the alternative? Do you just stop striving, abandon goals, give up on achievement and drift aimlessly? That's what you're afraid of, isn't it? That if you stop deferring happiness, stop using it as a motivator, you'll lose your drive. You'll become complacent. You'll settle. You'll stop growing. This fear is understandable. It's also false. The alternative isn't giving up on goals. It's recognizing that goals are tools, waypoints, structures for growth. They're not destinations where happiness lives. The alternative is learning to be present in your life as it is right now, while still working toward what you want. It's understanding that the journey isn't just a tedious prelude to the destination. The journey is your life. The destination is a story you tell yourself to justify movement. Think about the Japanese philosophical concept of ichi-go ichi-e. It translates roughly to one time, one meeting, or one encounter, one opportunity. The idea is that every moment is unique and unrepeatable. This conversation, this meal, this sunset, this ordinary Tuesday, it will never happen again in exactly this way. And because it's unrepeatable, it's inherently valuable. Not someday when you've earned the right to appreciate it. Right now, simply because it exists and you're present for it. This isn't feel-good mysticism. It's a radical reorientation of how you assign value to time. Western culture teaches you to value time based on its productivity, its efficiency, its contribution to future goals. But that framework turns every moment into currency you're spending on something else. You're never actually experiencing the moment. You're always assessing its value relative to some imagined future payoff. Ichi-go ichi-e invites you to value the moment for its own sake. To recognize that this specific configuration of circumstances, people, light, feeling, thought, this exact now, will dissolve in seconds and never return. So why would you postpone experiencing it? Why would you save your attention, your presence, your aliveness for some theoretical future when you're surrounded by the unrepeatable present? You might be thinking, that sounds nice in theory, but I have responsibilities. Bills, obligations, a job that demands my time, kids who need me. I can't just stop and smell the roses whenever I feel like it. You're right. You can't. And that's not what this is about. This is about where your attention goes when you're driving to work, when you're eating lunch, when you're sitting with your kid doing homework, when you're walking from your car to your front door. Are you present? Are you here? Or are you somewhere else? Replaying yesterday, rehearsing tomorrow, calculating how many more of these moments you need to endure before you reach the thing you're really waiting for? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. You're doing the homework moment, whether you're present for it or not. You're eating the lunch. You're driving the route. The time is passing regardless. The only question is whether you're actually in your life while it happens, or whether you're somewhere else waiting for permission to show up. You remember Jennifer from the previous chapter? Sitting in her Tesla, hesitating to call her sister. She's 47 years old, and she's still waiting for the right time. Still convinced that once she gets through this product launch, once she solidifies her position, once she feels secure enough, then she'll finally have space to reconnect with the people she's been postponing. But she's been saying that for 22 years. And the right time hasn't come. Because there is no right time. There's only time. And you're either using it to be present in your life or using it to prepare for a life you imagine you'll live later. Jennifer's story isn't special. It's depressingly common. Millions of people are living the same pattern, just with different details, waiting for conditions that will never be perfect. Deferring presence until they've earned the right to it through sufficient achievement or sacrifice. And what they discover, what Jennifer is beginning to discover at 47, is that the permission they've been waiting for external circumstances to grant can only come from one source: themselves. No achievement will give it to you. No milestone will unlock it. No future condition will suddenly make you feel like now is finally the moment you're allowed to be happy. You have to give yourself that permission. And you can do it right now. Today. This moment. Or you can keep waiting. You can keep deferring. You can keep believing that someday conditions will align and you'll finally feel ready. But what if someday never comes? What if you reach 70, 80, 90 and you're still waiting? What if you spend your entire finite existence preparing to live instead of actually living? Bronnie Ware's patients, the ones who expressed those 5 core regrets in their final days, didn't regret failing to achieve more. They regretted failing to be present for what they already had. They regretted waiting for permission that never arrived. They regretted the belief that their lives would begin someday after they'd earned it, when conditions were right. The 5th regret on Bronnie Ware's list, often overlooked but devastatingly relevant. I wish I had let myself be happier. Not, I wish I'd achieved more, or I wish I'd waited for better circumstances. The opposite. They wished they'd given themselves permission to be happy with what they had, when they had it. They wished they'd stopped treating happiness as something to earn and started treating it as something to choose. You can choose it. Right now. You won't feel ready. You won't feel like you've done enough yet. You'll have a list of reasons why today isn't the day. All of those reasons will sound logical and responsible and mature. They're still just reasons to keep waiting. And waiting is just a slower form of dying. Practical assignment. Today, not tomorrow, not when things calm down, not after you handle that one thing. Do something purely for the experience of doing it. Something with no productivity value, no networking benefit, no future payoff. Go for a walk without your phone. Sit in a park for 20 minutes and watch people. Make yourself a cup of coffee and actually taste it instead of drinking it while doing 3 other things. Call someone you care about and have a conversation where you're not planning your next response while they're talking. Do one thing today where you practice being present for its own sake. Not because it's efficient, not because it moves you toward a goal, just because this moment exists and you're alive in it. And that's enough. Chapter 6. Rewire your brain. Reclaim your life. Your brain is lying to you, though without malice or conscious intent. It's doing what it was trained to do through years of reinforcement. The thoughts that shape your deferred life aren't facts about reality. The belief that I'm not ready yet, or once I achieve this, then I'll be happy, represents interpretations you've been rehearsing so long, they've solidified into what feels like truth. Here's the good news. If these beliefs were learned, they can be unlearned. Your brain is plastic, adaptable, capable of forming new neural pathways at any age. The cognitive patterns that keep you stuck in waiting mode aren't permanent features of who you are. They're habits, and habits can be changed. But first, you have to see them. You have to recognize the specific lies your brain tells you and understand how they function. Because you can't challenge a belief you don't know you have. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most well-researched therapeutic approaches in psychology, operates on a foundational premise. Your thoughts shape your emotions, which drive your behaviors, which reinforce your thoughts. It's a loop. If the thoughts at the center of that loop are distorted or maladaptive, the entire system perpetuates dysfunction. The technical term for these distorted core beliefs is maladaptive schemas. Deep-seated assumptions about yourself, others, and the world that formed early in life and continue to influence how you interpret every experience. For people living with Deferred Life Syndrome, the most common schemas cluster around unworthiness and conditional value. The schema sounds like this. My worth depends on what I achieve. If I'm not producing, succeeding, or proving myself, I have no value. I don't deserve happiness, rest, or fulfillment until I've earned it through sufficient accomplishment. You might not say it that explicitly, probably don't consciously think those exact words. But watch how you behave. Watch what you tell yourself when you consider taking time off. Watch the guilt that surfaces when you do something purely for pleasure. How you measure your worth by your output. The schema is there, running in the background, shaping every decision about when you're allowed to start living. These schemas didn't come from nowhere. They were learned. Maybe from parents who equated love with achievement, or from a culture that treats rest as laziness and presence as wasted time, or from early experiences where approval was conditional on performance. Whatever the source, the belief took root, and now it governs your relationship with your own life. The question is, do you want to keep living by that rule, or are you ready to challenge it? Challenging a maladaptive schema isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about evidence. You examine the belief like a scientist examining a hypothesis. You ask, is this actually true? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? And most importantly, is this belief serving me, or is it destroying me? Let's take the core belief. I don't deserve to enjoy my life until I've achieved enough to earn it. Evidence that supports this belief. Society rewards achievement. People who work hard tend to be more successful. Delaying gratification can lead to better outcomes. Your parents told you that sacrifice now leads to reward later. Evidence that contradicts this belief. You've achieved things before, and it didn't grant you permission to be happy. You just moved the goalpost. People who are present and fulfilled tend to be more productive, healthier, and more successful than those who defer everything. Worthiness isn't something you earn. It's inherent to being human. You've been sacrificing for years, and it hasn't led to the fulfillment you expected. The belief starts to crack. Though not because you're being delusional or ignoring reality, but because you're applying scrutiny to something you previously accepted as fact. Now take it further. Ask, what would my life look like if I operated from a different belief? What if I believed that I'm worthy of presence, connection, and joy right now, regardless of what I've achieved? What would change? How would I spend today differently? What would I stop deferring? This isn't a hypothetical exercise. This is the work. You're not trying to convince yourself of something false. You're trying to see past the distortion to what's actually true. That your life is happening now, that you're worthy of experiencing it, and that waiting for permission from external circumstances is a trap that will keep you waiting forever. Think about Andy Dufresne in the film The Shawshank Redemption. Imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit and facing a life sentence. He has every reason to give up. Instead, he makes a choice that even in prison, even in circumstances that seem hopeless, he's going to live as fully as he can. He helps other inmates, builds a library, plays opera music over the prison loudspeakers because, for 2 minutes, it matters that something beautiful exists in a brutal place. There's a line in the film that captures this perfectly. Get busy living, or get busy dying. You're not in prison. You have more freedom than Andy Dufresne had. But you're still waiting for permission to start living. Still treating today as something to get through so you can reach tomorrow. You're busy dying while convincing yourself you're preparing to live. The shift required isn't external. It's internal. It's the decision to stop waiting for perfect conditions and start engaging with the life you have. To stop treating your worthiness as something contingent on achievement and start treating it as inherent. To recognize that the person you're waiting to become, the one who's finally successful enough, secure enough, accomplished enough to deserve happiness, is a fiction. That person doesn't exist. There's only you right now, and you get to decide whether this moment counts or whether you're going to keep postponing. Cognitive restructuring, the process of identifying and challenging maladaptive beliefs, doesn't happen once. It's not a single revelation that fixes everything. It's a practice, a daily, sometimes hourly, commitment to catching yourself in the old pattern and choosing differently. You'll catch yourself thinking, "I'll take a break once I finish this." And you'll pause. You'll ask, "Is that true? Or is that the schema talking? What if I took a break now and finished this after?" What would actually happen? Would I cease to be valuable? Would the world collapse? Or would I just be a human being who took a break? You'll catch yourself feeling guilty for doing something enjoyable. You'll recognize the guilt as a symptom of the schema, the belief that pleasure must be earned, and you'll challenge it. This guilt isn't proportional to reality. It's a learned response. I'm allowed to enjoy things. My worth isn't measured by constant productivity. It will feel awkward at first, forced, like you're lying to yourself. That's normal. You're rewiring neural pathways that have been reinforced for years, maybe decades. The old patterns run deep and won't vanish overnight. But here's what neuroscience tells us. Every time you challenge a maladaptive belief, every time you choose differently, you weaken the old neural pathway and strengthen a new one. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain is physically changing in response to your thoughts and behaviors. The more you practice the new pattern, the more automatic it becomes. Eventually, the new belief feels as natural as the old one did. You're not broken. You're not beyond repair. You're just running outdated software, and you can update it. Practical assignment. Write down one belief you have about when you're allowed to be happy or present in your life. Be specific. I'll be happy when I get the promotion. I can relax once the kids are grown. Or, I deserve a break after I finish this project. Now write down evidence that contradicts this belief. Times you achieved something and the happiness didn't last. People you know who are present and fulfilled without meeting your conditions. What you're missing right now while you wait. Finally, write a new belief that's grounded in reality rather than fantasy. I'm allowed to be present right now, even while working toward my goals. My worthiness isn't contingent on achievement. Or, I can experience joy today without waiting for perfect conditions. Read the new belief out loud once a day, every day, for 21 days. Your brain will resist. It will feel false and argue against it. Let it. Keep reading the new belief anyway. You're not lying to yourself. You're telling yourself the truth you've been avoiding. And watch what happens. Watch how your relationship with time starts to shift. How the urgency to achieve before you're allowed to live starts to loosen. How presence becomes possible today instead of someday. Chapter 7. Make goals. Your tool, not your prison. Goals aren't the problem. The relentless pursuit of goals as the only measure of your worth, that's the problem. You've been taught that setting ambitious goals and working tirelessly toward them is what separates successful people from failures. And there's truth in that to a point. Goals provide direction, structure, motivation. They give you something to aim for when the path forward isn't obvious. But somewhere along the way, goals stopped being tools and became masters. You stopped working toward them and started working for them, as if reaching the destination would finally grant you permission to be satisfied. You built your entire identity around striving, achieving, conquering the next milestone. And in doing so, you turned your life into an endless obstacle course, where the finish line keeps moving every time you approach it. Research by psychologist Carol Dweck at Stanford University introduced the concept of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. People with a growth mindset view challenges as opportunities to develop and learn. They see effort as a path to mastery. They understand that abilities can be cultivated through dedication and hard work. People with a fixed mindset, by contrast, believe their qualities are carved in stone. They're either good at something or they're not, and failure represents a verdict on their fundamental worth. What Dweck's research reveals about goal setting is profound. It's not whether you have goals that determines your satisfaction with life, but how you relate to those goals. Do you treat them as opportunities for growth and engagement, or as tests of your worthiness? Do you find value in the process of working towards something meaningful, or only in the moment of achieving it? If your happiness is entirely contingent on reaching specific outcomes, the promotion, the weight loss, the financial milestone, you're setting yourself up for chronic dissatisfaction. Because outcomes are partly outside your control, and even when you do achieve them, the satisfaction evaporates faster than you expect. You're back to baseline, looking for the next goal to justify your existence. Matthew McConaughey, in his Oscar acceptance speech, described an insight that shaped his approach to life and work. He said he needed a hero, someone to chase. When asked who that hero was, he answered, "It's me in 10 years." He explained that every 10 years, when he thinks he's getting close to that person, the hero is still 10 years away. The pursuit continues, but the point isn't to catch the hero. It's to keep moving, growing, engaging with the challenge. That's a healthy relationship with goals. The goal isn't the finish line where life finally begins. The goal is the reason you're moving, learning, stretching beyond who you were yesterday. It's the journey, not the destination. And that's not a cliché. It's the difference between living your life and deferring it. Think about what happens when you make goals your prison. You tell yourself you can't enjoy today because you haven't reached tomorrow's target yet. You dismiss everything good in your current circumstances because it doesn't match the idealized future you're working toward. You sacrifice relationships, health, presence, all the things that actually constitute a life. For the sake of hitting arbitrary markers you've convinced yourself will make you whole. And then you hit the marker. You get the promotion. You reach the number in your bank account. You achieve the thing you'd been chasing. And for maybe a week, you feel vindicated. You feel like it was all worth it. Then the feeling fades, and you realize you're the same person with the same baseline happiness, and the life you thought would begin once you achieved this thing still hasn't started because you never learned how to be present in it. This is why tunnel vision, the fixation on a single goal to the exclusion of everything else, is so destructive. You narrow your entire existence to one metric, convincing yourself that everything else can wait, that nothing matters except reaching that target. And in the process, you miss the only life you actually have, which is the one happening right now while you're too busy chasing tomorrow to notice. The alternative isn't abandoning goals. It's redefining your relationship with them. It's recognizing that goals are tools for organizing your energy and attention, structures that give shape to your days, reasons to grow and challenge yourself. They're valuable. They're useful. They're just not where happiness lives. Happiness lives in the process, in the moments between where you are and where you're going, in the conversation you have with a colleague while working on a project, in the satisfaction of solving a problem, not just completing the final deliverable, in the small victories along the way, the incremental improvements, the learning that happens when you're engaged with something that matters to you. If you can't find joy, meaning, and satisfaction in the process of working toward your goals, achieving those goals won't give you those things. You'll just generate new goals and keep deferring. The pattern will continue until you run out of time, and you'll look back and realize you spent your entire life preparing to live instead of actually living. So ask yourself, what would change if you decided that the process of pursuing your goals was where your life happens, not just the preparation for it? What if you celebrated progress instead of only outcomes? What if you found fulfillment in growth rather than arrival? What would today look like if you weren't constantly measuring it against an idealized tomorrow? Reflection. Question. What would you do today if you'd already achieved your biggest goal? If you'd already made the money, earned the title, reached the destination, what would you actually do with your time? How would you spend this day? Write it down. Then ask yourself, why are you waiting to do those things? What's stopping you from incorporating even one of them into your life right now? Chapter 8. Own your choices. Own your life. There's a story you've been telling yourself about why your life can't change, and it's a compelling narrative backed by what feels like irrefutable evidence. You have responsibilities that demand your time and attention, bills that require a steady income, people who depend on you showing up consistently, and obligations you can't simply abandon because you've decided you want to be more present in your own life. The story concludes with a familiar refrain. Your hands are tied, and you genuinely don't have a choice about how you spend your days. The uncomfortable truth, though, is that you've always had choices. You're just operating from a set of decisions you made long ago, often unconsciously, about what matters more to you than your own presence and fulfillment. You've chosen security over spontaneity, the weight of obligation over the lightness of desire, the approval of others over your own sense of aliveness. These decisions come with real trade-offs and genuine consequences that you have to navigate daily, and they're undeniably difficult to reconsider. But pretending you never made them, acting as though circumstances alone dictate everything, is precisely how you remain stuck in patterns that no longer serve you. The psychological concept of locus of control, developed by psychologist Julian Rotter in the 1950s, offers a framework for understanding this dynamic. People with an external locus of control operate from the belief that their lives are shaped primarily by forces outside themselves. Random circumstances, other people's decisions, luck, fate, or systemic factors beyond their influence. When outcomes are negative, they attribute it to bad luck or unfair treatment from others. And when things go well, they credit fortunate circumstances rather than their own actions. This worldview creates a pervasive sense of powerlessness because agency has been handed over to everything except the person themselves. In contrast, people with an internal locus of control recognize that while circumstances and external factors certainly matter, and not everything falls within their sphere of influence, they maintain significant control over their outcomes through the choices they make and the actions they take. They take ownership of their decisions and accept responsibility for the consequences that follow, whether positive or negative. Rather than waiting for external conditions to grant permission for a different way of living, they focus their energy on changing what lies within their control, while adapting as skillfully as possible to what doesn't. Research consistently demonstrates that individuals with an internal locus of control report substantially higher life satisfaction, better mental and physical health, greater resilience when facing adversity, and more success across multiple life domains. The difference isn't that they're luckier or born into better circumstances or possess some magical advantage. They simply operate from a fundamentally different assumption about their relationship to their own experience. That foundational assumption sounds something like this. I am the primary author of my life's narrative, even though I don't control every plot twist or external event that occurs. External circumstances certainly influence the story's direction and provide challenges I must navigate. But I ultimately decide how I respond to what happens, what I prioritize when resources are limited, how I allocate my finite time and energy, and what I'm willing to sacrifice versus what I refuse to compromise. My freedom isn't unlimited, and real constraints exist that I must acknowledge. But I possess far more choice than I've been allowing myself to recognize and exercise. Think about the powerful scene in Good Will Hunting where Sean Maguire repeats to Will over and over, "It's not your fault." Will resists this absolution despite knowing intellectually that his abusive childhood wasn't something he caused or deserved. Because emotionally, he's been carrying that trauma like an indelible verdict on his fundamental worth as a person. Sean isn't merely absolving Will of blame for what happened in his past. He's working to help Will understand that while the past was something that happened to him without his consent, his future remains something he gets to consciously choose and shape through his decisions moving forward. You're navigating a version of that same psychological dynamic right now. You've been carrying the belief that your circumstances dictate the parameters of your life, that you're essentially a passive recipient of whatever happens to you, with minimal agency to alter your trajectory. Perhaps, like Will, you had a past where that belief reflected reality. Maybe you grew up with severely limited options, with parents or guardians who controlled every significant decision, with economic constraints so tight they left virtually no room for choice or exploration. If that was your experience, it was genuinely real and profoundly shaped who you became. But here's what needs acknowledgement. You're no longer in that situation, regardless of how those earlier experiences continue to echo in your present-day thinking and emotional patterns. You're an adult with agency, with a genuine ability to make different choices than the ones you've been reflexively making based on old programming. The fact that these potential choices feel difficult, that they come bundled with trade-offs and risks that genuinely frighten you, doesn't negate their existence or your capacity to make them. Let's be absolutely clear about what this means in practical terms. Because this isn't some naive suggestion that you abandon all responsibility or pretend you can do whatever you want without facing any consequences. You have a mortgage that requires monthly payments to avoid foreclosure. You have children or aging parents who depend on your presence and financial support. You have employment that pays the bills and provides necessary health insurance. These represent real constraints that can't simply be wished away or ignored, and acknowledging them matters. However, within those genuine constraints, you possess considerably more freedom than you've been exercising or perhaps even recognizing exists. You could leave work at 6 o'clock instead of routinely staying until 8, choosing to spend those recovered hours with your family, even if doing so means the next promotion arrives more slowly than it might have otherwise. You could take a genuine lunch break that includes a walk outside instead of eating at your desk while responding to emails, even if that choice means you finish a particular project one day later than you'd originally planned. You could start declining commitments that drain your energy without providing meaningful value or satisfaction. Even if some people who've grown accustomed to your constant availability express disappointment or frustration, you could prioritize actual presence over mechanical productivity for one evening each week, even if that decision means your meticulously maintained to-do list doesn't get completely checked off by Friday afternoon. Every single one of these represents a genuine choice currently available to you, though they feel impossible because you've spent years, perhaps decades, reinforcing the belief that you simply don't have them. But they're there, waiting for you to recognize and exercise them. And you're afraid of what they'll cost in terms you've learned to value. Approval from others, financial security, The carefully constructed identity you've built around being the person who always says yes, who always sacrifices personal needs, who always puts themselves last on the priority list. The central question isn't actually whether you have choices available to you. The evidence clearly shows you do. The real question demanding an answer is whether you're willing to make different choices than the ones you've been making by default for so long that they feel like the only options. Are you willing to prioritize your presence in your own life, even when doing so feels uncomfortable and generates pushback from people who benefit from your current patterns? Are you willing to own your agency fully, even when that ownership means taking responsibility for what you've been deferring and acknowledging your role in creating your current circumstances? Because here's the uncomfortable truth that changes everything once you truly absorb it. If you continue waiting for external circumstances to spontaneously grant you permission to live differently, you'll be waiting for the rest of your life. The mortgage will always require payment every month. The job will always generate more demands than you can possibly meet. The obligations and requests and expectations will multiply rather than decrease. Because that's simply how life works when you've established patterns of endless availability. There will never arrive a magical moment when everything aligns perfectly and you suddenly feel ready to choose differently without fear or doubt. You have to choose now, with everything exactly as messy and imperfect and overwhelming as it currently feels. You have to decide that your life matters enough to make difficult choices about how you spend it, even when those choices require disappointing people or accepting trade-offs. You have to stop blaming circumstances for patterns you're actively maintaining and start owning your role in creating them, sustaining them, and ultimately having the power to change them. That represents the fundamental shift from victim mentality to authorship, from "I can't do anything about this" to "I'm choosing not to do that right now, and here are my reasons." The transformation requires moving from powerlessness to agency. And yes, it's genuinely terrifying, because it means you're responsible for your choices and can't hide behind circumstances anymore. It means if you're unhappy with how you're living, you have to acknowledge your role in that, rather than solely blaming external factors. But it also means you're free. Free to choose differently, to experiment with new ways of being, to prioritize what actually matters to you rather than what others expect. That freedom has always been there, waiting for you to claim it. Practical assignment. Write down 3 specific examples where you've told yourself, "I have no choice," in the past week. Now rewrite each one as, "I'm choosing X over Y because," and complete that sentence honestly. What are you actually prioritizing? What would you need to be willing to accept in order to choose differently? This exercise isn't about judgment. It's about clarity regarding where your agency actually exists. Chapter 9. The Power of Microjoys. You've been conditioned to think about happiness as something that arrives in large, transformative moments. The promotion you've been working toward for years, the vacation you've been planning for months, the major milestone that finally validates all your sacrifice and effort. You imagine that joy exists primarily in the big wins, the peak experiences, the highlights you'll remember and talk about for years afterward. And while those moments certainly matter and can bring genuine satisfaction when they occur, waiting for them to deliver sustained happiness is like waiting for lightning to strike. It happens occasionally, provides a brief, bright flash, and then you're back in the darkness, wondering when the next bolt will arrive. What research in positive psychology consistently demonstrates is that sustainable well-being doesn't come primarily from major life events or exceptional circumstances, but rather from the accumulation of small, positive experiences woven throughout your ordinary days. Psychologist Martin Seligman, whose work essentially founded the field of positive psychology, identified that people who report high life satisfaction aren't necessarily those who've achieved the most impressive goals or experienced the most dramatic positive events. They're the people who've cultivated the capacity to notice, appreciate, and actively create moments of genuine pleasure and meaning in their everyday existence. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending everything is wonderful when it genuinely isn't. And it's certainly not about dismissing real problems or avoiding necessary challenges. Rather, it's about recognizing that your brain has a negativity bias, an evolutionary adaptation that kept your ancestors alive by constantly scanning for threats and problems. Simprant, which means you naturally pay more attention to what's wrong than what's right, unless you deliberately train yourself to balance that tendency. Left to its default settings, your mind will fixate on the project that's behind schedule while barely registering the sunset you drove past, focus on the critical comment while dismissing 10 compliments, and dwell on what's missing while taking for granted what's present. Micro-joys represent the antidote to this pattern. Small, deliberate experiences of pleasure, beauty, connection, or satisfaction that you can access daily, regardless of your circumstances or achievements. The perfectly brewed cup of coffee you actually taste instead of gulping while checking email. The 3-minute conversation with a neighbor that makes you both laugh. The song that comes on during your commute that lifts your mood inexplicably. The feel of sun on your face during a brief walk outside. The moment of genuine connection when you look your child in the eye instead of over their shoulder at your to-do list. These experiences might sound trivial or insufficient compared to the major sources of happiness you've been chasing, and your achievement-oriented mind might dismiss them as insignificant distractions from more important pursuits. But neuroscience reveals something fascinating about how these small positive moments actually function in your brain. Each time you pause to fully experience something pleasant, even something as simple as savoring a bite of food or feeling gratitude for a kindness someone showed you, your brain releases dopamine and begins strengthening neural pathways associated with well-being and contentment. The more frequently you activate these pathways through micro-joys, the more your brain literally rewires itself to notice and generate positive experiences more readily. This is neuroplasticity in its most practical application. You're not just momentarily feeling better. You're actually changing the physical structure of your brain to make happiness more accessible over time. The person who consistently practices noticing and creating micro-joys gradually develops a brain that's genuinely better at experiencing satisfaction, not because their circumstances have dramatically improved, but because they've trained their neural circuitry to respond differently to the life they already have. Consider how this contrasts with your current approach, where happiness remains perpetually deferred until you achieve some future state worthy of celebration. You're essentially starving your brain of positive experiences in the present while promising yourself a feast that never quite arrives. And in the process, you're reinforcing neural pathways of dissatisfaction, inadequacy, and perpetual striving. Your brain is learning through repetition that the present moment is never quite good enough, that satisfaction lives somewhere in the future, that you shouldn't pause to enjoy anything, because there's always something more important demanding your attention. The television icon Fred Rogers, whose show helped millions of children and adults learn to find wonder in everyday life, had a philosophy that applies profoundly here. He believed in slowing down enough to notice what's actually happening around you, in treating ordinary moments as worthy of attention and appreciation, in recognizing that beauty and meaning exist in simple experiences if you're present enough to perceive them. Rogers wasn't advocating for ambitionless complacency. He accomplished an enormous amount in his life, but rather for maintaining connection to the present moment, even while working toward future goals. Creating a practice of micro-joys doesn't require changing your circumstances, abandoning your goals, or pretending you don't have real challenges to navigate. It simply requires developing the habit of noticing and amplifying the small positive experiences already available within your current life. You're not adding something that doesn't exist. These moments of potential joy are already there, happening constantly, while you're too busy deferring to notice them. The practice starts with attention, deliberately pausing multiple times throughout your day to fully experience something pleasant rather than letting it pass unnoticed. When you drink your morning coffee, actually taste it instead of using it as caffeinated fuel, while your mind races ahead to the day's agenda. When someone smiles at you, pause long enough to smile back and feel the brief connection. When you step outside, notice the weather, the sky, the sounds around you, rather than immediately diving back into your mental to-do list. These moments take seconds, not hours, and they're available regardless of how busy or stressed you are. The next step involves deliberately creating these experiences rather than just passively noticing them when they accidentally break through your distraction. This means building small rituals of pleasure into your routine. A 5-minute walk before starting work, a playlist of songs that genuinely lift your mood, a weekly phone call with someone who makes you laugh, a particular corner of your home you've made comfortable for reading or simply sitting quietly. These aren't indulgences you need to earn through sufficient productivity. They're essential nutrients for a brain that's been starving on the promise of future happiness while living in present tense deprivation. Research on habit formation suggests that consistency matters more than duration for creating lasting change. Which means 5 minutes of intentional micro-joy daily will reshape your brain more effectively than waiting for occasional big experiences to deliver happiness. You're building new neural infrastructure that makes well-being more accessible, and that happens through repetition rather than through achieving some magical threshold of success or freedom. Think about someone recovering from a long illness who's learning to appreciate abilities they previously took completely for granted. Walking without pain, eating food with appetite, sleeping through the night without waking in discomfort. They experience profound joy in what healthy people barely notice, because illness forced them to recognize how extraordinary the ordinary actually is. You don't need to wait for crisis or loss to develop that capacity for appreciation. You can choose to cultivate it now while you still have time to benefit from it. The challenge you'll face is that your achievement-oriented mind will resist this practice initially, arguing that you don't have time for such trivial pleasures when there's important work demanding attention. That resistance itself reveals how deeply you've internalized the belief that the present moment exists only to be sacrificed for the future. That joy is something you'll allow yourself to experience someday, rather than something you're permitted to access today. What transforms as you build this practice isn't primarily your external circumstances. You'll still have challenges, responsibilities, goals requiring effort. What changes is your relationship with the life you're already living, your capacity to find genuine satisfaction within your actual experience, rather than only in some idealized future version you're working toward. You begin to notice that happiness isn't actually located in achieving the next goal. It's available right now in this moment if you're willing to be present enough to experience it. Practical assignment. Create a list of 20 micro-joys, small, specific experiences that bring you genuine pleasure and are available within your current life, regardless of circumstances. These should be simple, achievable things like the first sip of really good coffee, 3 minutes of stretching when I wake up, looking at photos that make me smile, or the satisfying click of locking my car after arriving home. Keep this list easily accessible and commit to intentionally experiencing at least 3 of these micro-joys daily for the next 2 weeks. Track how this practice affects your baseline mood and your relationship with the present moment. Chapter 10. Master this moment. If you're someone who prides yourself on productivity and efficiency, the concept of mindfulness might sound like spiritual nonsense wrapped in vague platitudes about being present and breathing deeply. You've got deadlines to meet, responsibilities that demand your attention, goals that require relentless forward momentum. And sitting around noticing your breath feels like a luxury you can't afford or distraction from what actually matters. The idea that you should slow down and pay attention to the present moment when there's so much future to prepare for probably strikes you as impractical at best and actively counterproductive at worst. But research conducted over decades by figures like John Kabat-Zinn, who developed mindfulness-based stress reduction at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, demonstrates something remarkable about what happens when people learn to anchor their attention in the present moment, rather than constantly projecting into the future or ruminating about the past. Participants in MBSR programs show measurable reductions in anxiety and depression, improvements in immune function and cardiovascular health, increased ability to focus and make decisions under pressure, and enhanced overall quality of life. And these benefits emerge specifically from training the mind to stay with what's actually happening right now, instead of perpetually escaping into mental narratives about what might happen later. This isn't about abandoning planning or goal setting or pretending the future doesn't require your attention and preparation. Rather, it's about recognizing that you can only ever act in this present moment, that all your planning and strategizing happen now, and that the quality of your attention determines the quality of both your experience and your effectiveness when your mind is constantly elsewhere. Replaying past conversations, rehearsing future scenarios, worrying about things that might never happen. You're not actually present for the life you're living, which means you're missing the only existence you'll ever have access to while supposedly preparing for one that remains forever out of reach. Think about what happens during a typical moment in your day. You're eating lunch while reading work emails, mentally preparing for an afternoon meeting, half listening to a podcast, and vaguely aware that you haven't really tasted any of the food you've been mechanically consuming. Or you're driving home, replaying a difficult conversation from earlier while also worrying about tomorrow's schedule. And you arrive at your destination with no memory of the actual drive, because your body handled it on autopilot while your mind was completely elsewhere. Or you're sitting with your child who's telling you about their day, and you're nodding while actually thinking about the project deadline, responding with generic acknowledgments that don't reflect actual engagement with what they're saying. This is normal, common, how most people operate most of the time. But it's also a form of absence from your own life, a way of perpetually living in the past or future while treating the present as nothing more than time to endure until something more important arrives. You're functionally not here, not actually experiencing the moments that constitute your existence. And that absence compounds over time until you've spent years or decades waiting for your life to start while it's been happening all along without your participation. Mindfulness practice offers a way to reverse this pattern by training your attention to return to the present moment repeatedly throughout your day, not as an end in itself, but as the foundation for actually being alive in your life, rather than constantly postponing that experience. The practice doesn't require hours of meditation or adopting any particular spiritual framework or belief system. It's simply the repeated exercise of noticing when your mind has wandered away from what's actually happening and consciously bringing it back to present moment awareness. One of the most accessible techniques involves engaging all 5 senses deliberately to anchor yourself in immediate reality. When you notice your mind has drifted into rumination or future-oriented anxiety, you pause wherever you are and identify 5 things you can see right now, 4 things you can physically touch or feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This exercise takes less than 60 seconds, but immediately pulls your attention out of mental narratives and into sensory experience, which by definition can only occur in the present moment rather than in imagined pasts or futures. Another powerful technique involves conscious breathing, specifically the 4 to 7-8 pattern developed by integrative medicine specialist Dr. Andrew Weil. You breathe in through your nose for a count of 4. Hold that breath for a count of 7, and exhale through your mouth for a count of 8. This pattern activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which governs relaxation and recovery, while also demanding enough concentration that your mind has to release whatever story it was spinning in order to maintain the rhythm. Practiced regularly, this breathing pattern quite literally changes your physiology from stress response mode to calm and present mode. And it's available to you anytime, anywhere, regardless of circumstances. The classic example people use to illustrate mindfulness is eating a single raisin with complete attention, noticing its appearance, texture, smell, and finally taste with full sensory engagement rather than mindlessly popping it in your mouth while doing 17 other things simultaneously. This sounds ridiculous until you actually try it and realize how rarely you experience anything with that level of attention. How much of your life passes by while you're mentally elsewhere? How radically different fully experiencing one moment feels compared to the distracted semi-awareness you've normalized as your default state. Consider the iconic line from the 1986 film Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Ferris isn't advocating for irresponsibility or abandoning obligations. He's pointing out that you can spend your entire existence preparing for life while missing the life that's actually happening. That presence matters more than perfect circumstances. That you have to consciously choose to experience what's in front of you, or it will slip past while you're looking elsewhere. The challenge you'll encounter when attempting to build a mindfulness practice isn't technical difficulty. These techniques are simple enough that anyone can learn them in minutes. The challenge is confronting how uncomfortable it feels to stay present when your habitual pattern involves using mental escape as a way to avoid dealing with current reality. When you stop letting your mind run constant narratives about past and future, you suddenly become aware of feelings, thoughts, and sensations you've been avoiding through distraction. And that awareness can initially feel overwhelming or even painful. You might notice how much anxiety you carry about things that haven't happened yet and might never happen. You might become aware of how little satisfaction you derive from activities you thought you enjoyed because you've never actually given them your full attention. You might realize how lonely you feel despite being constantly surrounded by people because you're never truly present with anyone, including yourself. These insights are uncomfortable, but they're also necessary for changing patterns that aren't serving you. The alternative to developing mindfulness. Continuing to live perpetually absent from your present experience while waiting for some future moment when you'll finally allow yourself to be here, is continuing to defer your existence indefinitely. You can keep waiting for conditions to be perfect enough that you feel you've earned the right to be present. Or you can start practicing presence now with things exactly as messy and imperfect as they currently are. The choice, as always, is yours. Practical assignment. Choose one routine daily activity: drinking your morning coffee, brushing your teeth, walking from your car to your office, washing dishes, and commit to doing it with complete mindfulness for the next week. This means bringing your full attention to the physical sensations, sounds, sights, and smells of that activity every time you do it. When your mind wanders, and it will constantly at first, simply notice that it's wandered and gently bring it back without judgment. Track what you notice about your capacity for presence and how it affects your experience of that activity. Chapter 11. The 4-Step Escape Plan. You've spent considerable time understanding the problem, recognizing the pattern of deferring your life, identifying the beliefs that sustain that pattern, exploring the costs and consequences of living in perpetual preparation mode. Understanding matters, certainly. But understanding alone changes nothing if it doesn't translate into different choices and behaviors. At some point, insight has to become action, or you're simply consuming information about your problem while continuing to live inside it. Adding knowing about the pattern to the list of things you'll address once conditions improve. What follows isn't theory or philosophy or another framework for thinking about your life differently. It's a concrete, actionable system for actually breaking free from deferred living and establishing presence as your default mode, rather than something you'll get around to someday. This 4-step process draws on implementation science, the field that studies how to translate intentions into sustainable behavior change. And it's specifically designed to work within the constraints and responsibilities you actually have, rather than requiring you to completely restructure your existence before you're allowed to start living. Step 1. Identify your non-negotiables. The first step requires brutal honesty about what actually matters to you versus what you've been treating as important because you think you should or because others expect it. You're going to write down 3 to 5 non-negotiables, specific experiences, practices, or elements that you genuinely believe constitute a life worth living for you personally. Regardless of what achievement culture or social pressure says should matter. These need to be concrete rather than abstract. Spending meaningful time with my children rather than vague family, or creating something with my hands weekly rather than generic creativity. Research by psychologist Peter Gallwitzer on implementation intentions demonstrates that specificity dramatically increases follow-through. So your non-negotiables need enough detail that you'll recognize whether you're honoring them or not. If one of your non-negotiables is physical health, specify exactly what that means in practice. Exercising 30 minutes 4 times weekly gives you concrete criteria, whereas being healthier remains too vague to act on or evaluate. The purpose of this clarity is creating actionable standards rather than aspirational concepts you can continue deferring indefinitely. Once you've identified these non-negotiables, you're going to schedule them into your week with the same commitment you bring to unmissable obligations like important meetings or bill payments. This isn't about finding time for them eventually. It's about putting them in your calendar right now and treating them as appointments you don't cancel except in genuine emergencies. You're not waiting until work slows down or until you have more energy or until conditions improve before you honor what you've identified as genuinely important for your well-being and sense of meaning. Step 2. Implement the not until rule. This step involves reversing the deferral pattern at its core by creating a new rule. You don't get to defer the activities associated with your non-negotiables until you've completed your work or achieved your goals or met everyone else's expectations. Instead, you practice the reverse priority. You ensure you've honored your non-negotiables before you pour unlimited energy into everything else that claims urgency. This sounds simple, but requires confronting the belief system that says you have to earn the right to meet your own needs through sufficient productivity or achievement first. The not until rule operates differently. You don't work late until you've gone for that run you committed to. Or you don't check email until you've had breakfast sitting down instead of standing over the sink. Or you don't say yes to that additional project until you've protected the evening you promised to yourself or your family. You're establishing boundaries that prioritize presence alongside productivity rather than treating presence as something you'll get to once you've exhausted yourself meeting external demands. The immediate objection your mind raises probably involves consequences. What happens if establishing these boundaries means you don't meet a deadline, or someone's disappointed, or you don't get the promotion you've been working toward, or you're seen as less committed than your colleagues? These are legitimate concerns that deserve consideration. But they also reveal how thoroughly you've internalized the belief that your worth depends on constant availability and endless sacrifice. The question you need to ask isn't whether these boundaries might have costs. They will. But whether continuing to live without them has greater costs that you're simply more practiced at ignoring or justifying. Step 3. Build micro-commitments. Sustainable change rarely comes from massive overhauls requiring perfect execution. It comes from small, consistent actions repeated until they become automatic. This step involves identifying the smallest possible version of each non-negotiable that you could maintain even on your worst day, and committing to that minimum no matter what else is happening. If one of your non-negotiables involves exercise, the micro-commitment might be putting on workout clothes even if you don't actually exercise, because establishing the habit of initiating the behavior matters more initially than achieving the full outcome. James Clear's research on habit formation, documented in his book Atomic Habits, demonstrates that identity-based habits, actions taken because they reflect who you are rather than what you want to achieve, prove significantly more sustainable than outcome-based goals. Your micro-commitments should focus on becoming the kind of person who honors their well-being and presence, rather than on achieving specific results. You're not aiming to become fit or productive or successful through these practices. You're practicing being someone who doesn't defer their own life. And fitness or success or whatever else you're working toward becomes a byproduct rather than the justification for your efforts. The power of micro-commitments lies in their consistency and their resilience to circumstances. You can maintain them regardless of how busy or stressed or overwhelmed you feel, which means they continue working even when motivation fails or conditions worsen. You're not depending on perfect circumstances or abundant willpower to sustain the practices that keep you present in your life, which means those practices survive the inevitable challenges and setbacks that would derail more ambitious but fragile commitments. Step 4. Establish accountability. Changing deeply ingrained patterns while navigating the same environment and relationships that reinforce those patterns requires external accountability beyond your own intentions and willpower. This final step involves creating structures that make it more difficult to default back to old patterns than to maintain new ones. Whether through sharing your commitments with someone who'll check in regularly, joining a group engaged in similar changes, using technology to track adherence and flag when you're slipping, or establishing consequences, positive or negative, tied to following through. The specific form of accountability matters less than ensuring it's regular, non-judgmental, and focused on behavior rather than outcomes. You're not creating shame around falling short. You're creating visibility around patterns so they can't continue operating unconsciously. When someone asks whether you honored your non-negotiables this week, and you have to answer honestly, that simple act of accounting makes it harder to dismiss or rationalize choices that undermine your stated priorities. Research on behavior change consistently shows that people who establish external accountability structures achieve significantly higher follow-through rates than those relying solely on personal determination. Your brain is extraordinarily skilled at generating convincing justifications for why today isn't the right day to honor those commitments, or why this particular circumstance deserves an exception. And external accountability provides necessary resistance to that pattern of self-exemption. You're creating friction around the behaviors you want to reduce and support around the behaviors you want to increase. Bringing it together. These 4 steps aren't meant to be implemented once and forgotten. They're meant to become an ongoing practice of repeatedly choosing presence over deferral, repeatedly honoring your non-negotiables over less important urgencies, repeatedly recommitting to being here in your life, rather than perpetually preparing for some future version that never quite arrives. You'll fall short regularly. Circumstances will challenge your commitments, and you'll face pressure to abandon these boundaries in favor of external demands. That's not failure. That's the ongoing reality of maintaining different patterns than the ones your environment and conditioning reinforce. The question isn't whether this will be difficult or require trade-offs. It will. The question is whether you're willing to prioritize being present in your actual life over achieving some idealized future version you've been deferring everything for. The 4-step escape plan gives you the structure to make that choice actionable, rather than remaining an aspiration you'll address someday when conditions improve. Chapter 12. When you fall, and you will. You're going to fail at this. Probably soon and definitely repeatedly. You'll honor your non-negotiables for a week or 2, and then miss a day because something urgent came up, and then miss another day because you're exhausted. And before you realize what's happening, you'll be back in old patterns, deferring presence for productivity and convincing yourself you'll restart once things calm down. You'll practice mindfulness for a month and genuinely experience the benefits, feeling more present and less anxious than you have in years. And then, a particularly stressful period will hit, and you'll abandon the practice entirely because it feels like one more thing demanding your limited energy. This isn't pessimism or lack of faith in your capacity to change. It's simply acknowledging reality about how behavior change actually works versus how we fantasize it should work. You've spent years, perhaps decades, reinforcing patterns of deferral, developing neural pathways that automatically prioritize future goals over present experience, building an identity around being the person who sacrifices today for tomorrow. Those patterns don't vanish because you understand they're problematic or because you've committed to doing things differently. They persist, sometimes underground, waiting for moments of stress or distraction or fatigue when your conscious awareness drops and automatic behaviors take over. The question that determines whether you actually change your relationship with deferred living isn't whether you'll fall back into old patterns. You absolutely will. The question is, what happens after you fall? Whether you use the slip as evidence that change is impossible and permission to stop trying, or whether you treat it as expected data about the difficulty of the work you're doing and recommit to the process despite the setback. This distinction between catastrophizing failure and normalizing it as part of the journey represents the difference between people who eventually establish new patterns and people who cycle endlessly through temporary changes, followed by complete abandonment. Research by Stanford psychologist Kelly McGonigal on willpower and self-control demonstrates that how people respond to violations of their goals dramatically affects whether they maintain progress or spiral back to baseline. People who treat a single slip as catastrophic failure and evidence of their fundamental inadequacy tend to give up entirely, reasoning that if they can't maintain perfection, then there's no point in trying at all. People who treat slips as normal, expected occurrences that provide information about challenges to address without reflecting on their fundamental worth, maintain momentum through setbacks, and eventually establish sustainable change. The practice that makes the difference involves self-compassion combined with honest assessment, acknowledging that you fell short of your intentions without either dismissing it as irrelevant or treating it as proof that you're hopeless. You notice what happened. Investigate the circumstances that led to the slip. Identify what you can learn about your vulnerabilities or triggers or patterns, and then make a specific plan for how you'll handle similar circumstances differently next time. You're treating each failure as valuable data rather than as a verdict on your character or capacity. Consider a specific example of how this works in practice. You've committed to leaving work by 6 o'clock to have dinner with your family as one of your non-negotiables, and you've successfully maintained this boundary for 3 weeks. Then, a major crisis emerges at work that genuinely requires your immediate attention, and you stay until 8 without even texting your family to explain. You arrive home to find they've already eaten, your partner is frustrated, and you feel like you've failed completely at the entire project of being more present in your life. The catastrophizing response looks something like this. I knew I couldn't maintain this. I'm too committed to work to ever prioritize family properly. There's no point in trying because something will always come up that I have to handle. I might as well stop pretending I can change and accept that this is just who I am. This internal narrative leads to abandoning the boundary entirely because one violation has been interpreted as proof that the entire effort is futile. The self-compassionate yet accountable response looks different. I had a genuine crisis that required staying late, and I handled the work situation appropriately. However, I didn't communicate with my family about what was happening, which meant they felt abandoned rather than understanding the unusual circumstances. Next time a legitimate emergency arises, I'll text immediately to let them know I'll be late and why, which maintains the relationship trust even when I can't maintain the boundary. I'll honor the boundary tomorrow, because one necessary violation doesn't negate my commitment. The difference between these two responses determines whether you're still practicing presence a year from now, or whether you've cycled back into complete deferral mode. The first response treats one setback as total failure and uses it to justify giving up. The second response treats the setback as information about how to improve the system without abandoning the commitment underlying it. Building resilience for inevitable failures requires establishing what addiction recovery frameworks call slip versus relapse distinction. A slip represents a single violation of your commitment: missing one workout, defaulting to distraction during one family dinner, working late one evening despite your boundary. A relapse represents abandoning the commitment entirely and returning to previous patterns as your default mode. Slips are normal, expected, inevitable parts of any change process. Relapses are what happen when you treat slips as evidence that change is impossible and permission to stop trying. The specific practice for preventing slips from becoming relapses involves implementing what's called the 24-hour rule. No matter what happened yesterday, no matter how completely you violated your commitments or fell back into old patterns, you recommit to honoring your non-negotiables today. You don't wait until Monday to restart or until you feel motivated again or until circumstances improve. You start again immediately, with things exactly as messy as they currently are, because waiting for perfect conditions to recommit is just another form of deferral. Think about how this applies to the reality that you're navigating actual responsibilities and constraints that genuinely require flexibility and can't simply be ignored for the sake of your boundaries. You're not being asked to become so rigid in your commitments that you sacrifice necessary adaptability or fail to respond appropriately to genuine emergencies. You're being asked to distinguish between actual emergencies that justify boundary violations and the constant stream of urgencies your brain classifies as emergencies, because that justifies returning to familiar patterns. The honest assessment you need to make repeatedly involves asking, was this genuinely an exception requiring flexibility? Or am I using this situation to avoid the discomfort of maintaining my boundaries? Sometimes the answer will legitimately be the former, and you'll need to violate your boundary while maintaining your commitment by returning to it afterward. Often the answer will be the latter, and you'll need to acknowledge that you're choosing temporary comfort over long-term change and recommit despite the discomfort. You'll also need to address the reality that some people in your life benefit from your current patterns and will consciously or unconsciously resist your attempts to change them. When you start establishing boundaries that prioritize presence over constant availability, some colleagues will be inconvenienced. Some family members might initially feel your reduced productivity as abandonment. Some friends might interpret your commitment to your own well-being as selfish. Their resistance doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong to change. It often means they've organized their lives around your old patterns and need time to adjust to new ones. Managing this resistance requires clear communication about what you're doing and why, combined with consistent follow-through that demonstrates you're serious about these changes despite pushback. You're not asking for permission or approval. You're informing people about boundaries you're establishing because you've recognized that continuing old patterns isn't sustainable. Some people will adjust and ultimately appreciate the healthier version of you that emerges from these changes. Some won't adjust and will continue pressuring you to return to being constantly available. Your job is maintaining your boundaries consistently enough that people eventually accept them, rather than treating them as negotiable preferences you can be talked out of. The final element of resilience involves building what psychologists call a growth mindset, specifically about your capacity to be present in your life. Carol Dweck's research distinguishes between fixed mindset, believing your qualities are unchangeable and failures reveal fundamental limitations, and growth mindset, believing your abilities can develop through effort and failures provide information about what to learn next. Applied to the work of escaping deferred living, growth mindset means treating your capacity for presence as a skill you're developing rather than a quality you either have or don't have. Every time you fall back into old patterns, you're not proving that you're fundamentally incapable of change. You're gathering information about what triggers your defaults, what support structures you need to build, what beliefs you still need to challenge. You're learning, slowly and through repeated practice, how to live differently than you've lived for years. That learning process includes failures, setbacks, and moments of profound frustration where you wonder whether any of this is worth the effort. The answer to that question depends on whether you believe your life is worth living now, rather than perpetually deferring until conditions improve. If you believe it is, then the effort of repeatedly recommitting despite failure becomes worthwhile. If you don't, then you'll keep waiting for permission that never comes from circumstances that never align perfectly. And you'll arrive at the end of your life having spent most of it in the waiting room. When you fall, and you will, repeatedly, the only question that matters is, what happens next? Do you give up, or do you start again? The answer to that question, repeated hundreds of times over months and years, determines whether you eventually escape the pattern of deferred living or remain trapped in it, despite briefly glimpsing another way. Conclusion: your life is boarding now. You remember the metaphor from the introduction, the one about spending your entire existence in an airport terminal, waiting for your boarding call while the plane you're meant to catch has been taxiing on the runway this whole time, ready for takeoff but missing its only passenger. That image wasn't dramatic exaggeration or clever rhetoric designed to manipulate your emotions into buying a book. It was the most accurate description available for how you've been living if you've spent years convinced that your real life starts once you achieve the next goal, reach the next milestone, clear the next hurdle. The devastating truth that bears repeating now that you've worked through 12 chapters exploring every angle of deferred living is this: there is no boarding call coming. The announcement you've been waiting for, the one that says, now you're ready, now you've earned it, now you can finally start living the life you've been preparing for all these years. That announcement doesn't exist. You made it up as a way to justify postponing presence, deferring joy, treating today as nothing more than an obstacle between you and some imaginary tomorrow, when everything finally aligns perfectly. The plane isn't waiting for conditions to improve before it departs. The plane is leaving right now, with or without you aboard. And you get to decide whether you're spending the flight experiencing the journey, or whether you're still sitting in the terminal when it lands, having missed the entire experience while waiting for permission that was never required in the first place. You've been given every tool you need to make that choice differently than you've been making it. You understand the psychological mechanisms that sustain deferred living, the maladaptive schemas about worthiness, the hedonic treadmill that ensures achievements never satisfy, the external locus of control that convinces you circumstances dictate everything. You've learned cognitive restructuring techniques for challenging the beliefs that keep you stuck, mindfulness practices for anchoring attention in present experience, and concrete behavioral systems like the 4-step escape plan for translating insight into sustainable change. None of that information matters if you continue treating it as something you'll apply once you have more time, once work calms down, once you feel more ready. The knowledge you've gained becomes just another item on the list of things you'll get to someday. Another element of the life you're perpetually preparing to live instead of actually living. Understanding your patterns doesn't change them unless you use that understanding to make different choices starting right now, with circumstances exactly as imperfect as they currently are. Think about Michael and Jennifer, whose stories open this book as examples of two different manifestations of the same underlying syndrome. Michael with his corner office and his father's ghost whispering about delayed rewards, perpetually convinced he needs to achieve just a little more before he's earned the right to actually inhabit his life. Jennifer in her Tesla in parking lots, choosing work over connection, performance over presence, believing that someday, after one more product launch, she'll finally have space to be human again. Both of them know intellectually that they're making choices that aren't serving them, that they're sacrificing the only life they'll ever have for the promise of a future that keeps receding no matter how much they achieve. Knowing isn't enough. Knowing without choosing differently is just informed deferral, where you understand exactly how you're wasting your finite existence, but continue doing it anyway, because change feels too difficult or risky or uncomfortable compared to the familiar misery of waiting. The question facing you right now isn't whether you have enough information to make different choices. You do. The question is whether you're willing to act on that information despite fear, despite uncertainty, despite all the voices, internal and external, insisting that you need to earn presence through more achievement before you're allowed to experience it. The question is whether you believe your life matters enough to prioritize being in it over perpetually preparing for it. You will resist this work. Your brain will generate infinite reasons why today isn't the right day to start implementing your non-negotiables, why this week is too chaotic for mindfulness practice, why you should wait until after this project or this deadline or this busy season to establish boundaries around your time and attention. Every single one of those reasons will sound completely legitimate and rational, and they're all just sophisticated forms of the same deferral pattern you've been using for years. The only counter to that resistance is the practice of starting anyway, of implementing the smallest possible version of your commitments, regardless of whether conditions feel right, of repeatedly choosing presence even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient or seemingly at odds with achieving your goals. You're building new neural pathways through repetition, establishing new patterns through consistency, becoming someone different through daily practice rather than through a single dramatic transformation. You remember Bronnie Ware's dying patients and their 5 core regrets? Particularly that 5th one that gets less attention than the others. I wish I had let myself be happier. They didn't wish they'd achieved more or earned more or reached higher goals. They wished they'd given themselves permission to experience joy, connection, and satisfaction with what they already had, instead of treating happiness as something to be earned through sufficient sacrifice and achievement. They wished they'd recognized that presence is always available and never needs to be earned. That you can choose to be here in your life at any moment, regardless of what you've accomplished or what remains undone. You have that choice available right now. You can finish reading these final paragraphs and close the book and return to exactly the same patterns you've been living, armed with new language for describing your deferral, but fundamentally unchanged in how you relate to time, goals, and your own worthiness. Or you can decide that this moment, imperfect, incomplete, not at all what you imagined your life would look like when you started, is nevertheless the only moment you actually have access to. And it's enough. It has to be enough because it's all there is. The life you're waiting for is already here, happening right now while you decide whether to participate in it or continue preparing for some idealized version that exists only in imagination. Every moment you spend believing you'll be happy once you achieve the next thing is a moment of your finite existence spent waiting instead of living, postponing instead of experiencing, preparing instead of being. You open this book presumably because something wasn't working in how you've been living, some vague recognition that you're spending your life in the terminal while the plane boards without you. That recognition was accurate. And now you have comprehensive understanding of the mechanisms creating that pattern, plus concrete tools for changing it. What you do with that understanding and those tools determines whether your life changes or whether you simply become someone who knows a lot about deferred living while continuing to practice it daily. The plane is boarding. The doors are closing. This is your final boarding call. Not from external circumstances or future achievements or perfect conditions, but from your own recognition that you're dying right now. That time is passing regardless of whether you're present for it, and that you'll never get these moments back to live them differently. So what happens next? Do you get on the plane, or do you stay in the terminal convincing yourself you'll catch the next one? Because there is no next one. There's only this flight, this life, this series of present moments strung together into the only existence you'll ever have. The choice, as it's always been, is yours. But choose quickly. The plane won't wait forever.